So what about and take it from someone who doesn't really know much about the long-range missiles or missiles in general. What about the missiles that we've been hearing about in context of deliveries to Ukraine? So the German Taurus, then you have the French Scamp, I think, the British, uh, I forgot the name, but aren't those missiles that would be applicable for that context to be used by Europe? And have we increased the production numbers for those?
Yeah, so that's the real scandal, right? And that's the real failure of our political leadership. Taurus not produced. Is not being produced right now. Storm Shadow not at all. Storm Shadow not being produced. Scalp Ichi is being produced, likely at a rate of 50 to 100 a year. That is the only designated land attack capability um, that is actively being produced in Europe together with the Norwegian American Joint Strike Missile. We don't have production number for those, but I think inside Norway, maybe make it another 50 to 100 missiles that are being produced. It's also a land attack cruise missile. It's a really good one, right? It can be carried inside the F-35 weapons bay. It's a really great capability for the F-35. Very high quality weapon system, but it's just not being produced at nearly the number that we need, right? So overall, missile production in Europe across all categories, right? Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, long-range drones, at present stands at 100 to 200 land attack cruise missiles. You have the other thing is you have anti-ship cruise missiles that are being produced. So Kongsberg, they have drastically scaled up production. They're currently producing some 400 a year. That's really the only big exception. But right, these missile systems, they're very short in range, around 200 to 300 kilometers. And again, right, they're optimized for maritime targets. So you don't necessarily want to launch them against land targets, simply because, right, in terms of payload capacity, warhead, price point, it's just not optimized for a land environment. So that's not ideal either. And yeah, so in terms of like a missile capability that has a range of more than 500 kilometers, it really is only Joint Strike Missile and Scalp EG, and together a production number of 100 to 200 missiles. And the thing is, right, sure, we could restart production for Taurus, for example, but the estimate here is that it would take probably around, in a best case scenario, around 3 years until the first Taurus comes off the production belt. In a worst case scenario, it's more like 4 years, perhaps even more. And that's just because the supply chain is very complex, right? You can't just snap with your finger and you're producing missiles. You have to restart a whole supply chain that has been dormant for years and years. In the case of Taurus, since 20.
But why wasn't it started sooner? Because it would be an obvious decision for both, practical defense reasons, but also I imagine as a private company making those, then there would be clear financial incentives. I imagine there would be a lot of countries in Europe that would want to buy those.
Yeah. So in terms of Taurus, first of all, it's illegal for German defense companies to produce systems that are not ordered. So they cannot just produce and wait then for a customer. That's also that's financially not smart. Because right, the missile systems, they're very expensive, so they're capital intensive products. So yeah, that's not a small tactical drone where you can build up, let's say, also the production capacities in peacetime, and then wait for the order to come in. Missile production is capital intensive, so you want to have an order from a government. You want to have guaranteed order intake in order to build up the production capacity and then start producing. But right, even if that wasn't the case, producing in Germany at least, I don't know exactly how the legal framework looks like in France and the UK, but in Germany at least, it's not allowed for these companies to produce while waiting for a customer. But they wouldn't have done it anyways, right? And it's purely political. And it goes back to what we discussed earlier, that it was just politically not seen as an attractive choice to invest in a strike capability, whereas it was very easy to invest in missile defense. And obviously that is huge political leadership failure, right? And if a war between Russia and NATO starts, and if Russian ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, long range drones start pummeling our cities and our critical infrastructure. And we see that we're not able to intercept them nearly at the rate that our political leadership suggested. I think, that is one of those failures that I hope these decision makers will have to take accountability for in the future, right? But it will be their fault, right? And I really hope it doesn't come back to haunt our societies. But they have made a tremendous, tremendous mistake.
And then you have things like HIMARS, which a lot of nations are buying, but those are, I guess, are our missiles, but they're short range, which I guess serves a different purpose.
Yeah, so HIMARS is rocket artillery mainly. So that's the GIMLARS missile, which have a range of 80 kilometers, and then you have the extended range variant, which some European states have ordered, which is 150-kilometer range. And then it can also launch ATACMS. ATACMS is a short-range ballistic missile with a range of, I think, 300 kilometers. Yeah, and it's a ballistic missile capability which quite a few countries in Europe have ordered now, and that's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming countries for ordering that weapon system, but we have to be very aware of the fact that ATACMS is a fairly old capability. It's really, several decades old, and the Russians actually, after initial strikes were quite successful, the Russians now they're really good at intercepting ATACMS. So there are reports that if Ukraine wants to penetrate or strike a target that is protected by Russian missile defense, they have to allocate 8 to 16 ATACMS ballistic missiles in order to hit 1 to 2 aim points with fairly high certainty, because ATACMS is intercepted in quite substantial numbers. And that would be the case in a war between Russia and NATO as well.
If you care about geopolitics, and I assume you do since you're listening to this, you might want to consider signing up to get my newsletter, Station Zero. Once every week or two, you'll get a free geopolitical analysis, a story, trend, or pattern of something that's really important but that most people tend to miss. Like the one where I describe a chaotic oil war that's been going on between the US, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, that you basically never hear about, but that's quietly shaping geopolitics. If you want to sign up, just click the link in the description.